If you want to feel better, have more energy, think clearer, manage your weight more easily, then this video is for you. Because today we're talking about the simplest and most powerful thing you can do for your health. Eat more whole foods. You know what's really funny? Well, it's actually not funny. It's quite sad really. And that is that highly processed foods have become so normal that eating a whole food diet now sounds like just another fad or trend. That's how far we've come. So let's get clear on what whole foods actually are. Whole foods are real foods that have just one ingredient. What they actually are. A capsicum is a capsicum. A strawberry is a strawberry. An egg is an egg. Compare that to a chocolate bar that has over 10 different ingredients, most of which are rubbish sugar, seed oils, and just stuff you can't even pronounce. That's not real food, okay? So whole foods come from nature and stay close to how they grow. Think fresh fruits and vegetables, meats, fish, eggs, oils, herbs, whole grains. The biggest thing that changes your body is the food you eat. You should think of food like medicine. Every single bite you take is packed with tiny things called molecules that talk to every part of your body. Food is like information. When you eat, you're actually writing little instructions for your body, kind of like coding a video game, but for your insides. It changes things like how your genes work, how your hormones work, your brain chemicals which affect your mood, how you turn food into energy, the good bacteria in your tummy, the tiny power plants inside your cells, and even how well your body fights sickness. And so if you keep eating the wrong stuff, your body gets confused and can start feeling bad or getting sick, over time. In fact, poor eating is one of the biggest contributors to physical problems like obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. And also to a lot of mental health struggles like depression, anxiety, and brain fog. And so that's why it's really so important to eat real whole foods, because they can lower swelling in your body. It make your good gut bugs happy and really protect you from getting sick. Here's something powerful about weight and obesity. A well-known study from the NIH, led by Kevin Hall, gave people either an ultra-processed diet or a whole food diet. On the ultra-processed diet, people ate about 500 extra calories every single day without even trying, which led to nearly a pound of fat gain per week. But when they switched to a whole food diet, the same people naturally ate about 300 calories less per day and lost weight. So eating whole foods isn't just healthier, it makes managing a healthy weight much easier too. Now, let's get practical. I want to share with you some simple ways to eat more whole foods, without feeling overwhelmed. Okay, so my first tip is to start with one whole food swap at a time. You don't need to change everything overnight. Just swap one processed item for one whole food version. And like an example, swap sugary cereals for yogurt with fresh fruit, or chips for a handful of berries, or macadamia nuts. Another win is to make half of your plate vegetables, at every meal. Veggies should be taking up half your plate because they're full of fiber, vitamins, antioxidants. And so when you add more veggies, you naturally eat less of the processed junk. Another thing you want to do is to meal prep whole foods in advance. Life gets busy, so prep ahead. Cook a big batch of quinoa, or brown rice, roast a tray of vegetables, or chop up fruit for the week. Not for the week, for the next day. Because when healthy food is ready in the fridge, then you're much more likely to eat it. My next tip is to keep healthy whole food snacks on hand, because snacking is where processed foods seem to sneak in a lot. So keep easy options, fresh fruits, nuts, hard-boiled eggs, carrot sticks with hummus, yogurt with berries on hand. And also try to cook more at home, because that lets you control exactly what goes into your food. Just start with one home-cooked meal a day. Even simple things like a big salad, grilled chicken with veggies, or, even a smoothie. It cuts out tons of hidden sugars and additives. My next tip is that if you're someone who, likes more of a structure to, or wants more of a structure to eating whole foods, then you may want to adopt, a whole foods eating style that suits you. And there are many styles out there. But some of the more popular ones include, let me think about this, probably the Mediterranean one's the most popular way of eating, which is really lots of vegetables, fruits, olive oil, nuts, fish, legumes. It focuses on fresh seasonal food and shared meals. Then you also have things like vegetarian, which is obviously no meat or fish, but includes things like eggs, dairy, and plenty of plants. Or pescatarian, which is like vegetarian, but it adds in, fish and seafood. Then you have things like paleo, which focuses on meat, fish, eggs, vegetables, fruits and nuts, but avoids the grains and processed foods. Or carnivore, which is mostly animal foods, such as, meat, fish, eggs. Or you've got things like keto, and there is a lot of different versions of the keto, but generally this is low in carbs and higher in healthier fats, sources like olive oil, avocado, meat. And look, there's so much debate about which style is best, but honestly it really doesn't matter, because what matters is that you're eating whole foods, because it's processed foods, all this crap here, that are the real enemy. So as long as you're getting a good balance of macros and micros in a way that feels sustainable, then you really are on the right track. Personally, whilst I mostly have a Mediterranean way of eating, because I am from the Mediterranean, it's not something I define myself by or stick to entirely. Instead, I simply eat whole foods in an intuitive way. And this takes me on to my next tip, which is to eat foods from your own culture and ancestry. And I say this because food isn't just nutrition, it's also cultural. Your grandparents and great-grandparents ate foods from their environment, traditions and lineage, and your body, including your taste buds, often feel more at home with those foods. And so every culture has its own beautiful versions of whole food eating. For example, Vietnamese or Southeast Asian, eat things like fresh herbs, broths, rice, fermented fish sauce, and nose to tail eating. East Asians eat fermented soy, sea vegetables, fish, in mindful portions. Middle Eastern people eat olive oil, legumes, yogurt, herbs, in communal meals often. African traditional people eat slow-cooked stews, tubers, greens, and fermented grains. Whereas the Nordic often eat things like fatty fish, root vegetables, and fermented dairy. And so the key is to eat what your ancestors ate and what fits your culture and values, because you're far more likely to enjoy it and stick with it in the long term. So honor your heritage, your geography, your family traditions, and choose whole foods that feel right to you. And the same goes for herbs too. Add and choose herbs that honor your cultural values and taste buds. Think, fresh herbs like basil, coriander, parsley, turmeric, ginger, and garlic, which aren't just for flavor, they really are packed with antioxidants and compounds that fight inflammation and support your gut and immune system. Being European, I eat parsley, basil and garlic. I've got so much of it in my garden pretty much every day. But you might enjoy other herbs, and that's perfectly fine too. Just ensure to always add them generously to your meals. Also, just in reference to the different versions of whole foods I shared, notice how they all had their own version of fermented whole foods. The reason for that is because fermented foods are super good for your gut health. Because all good health starts in your gut. It really is that important. So always make sure that fermented foods are a large part of your whole food diet each day. These are actually some pickled eggplants that we make. They are absolutely to die for delicious. And my family's been making them for hundreds of years. My nonna and her mum made them. So, again, it's that lineage. And finally, the last tip I want to give you is to remember to also eat whole foods, not only for your body, but also for your brain too. And I say that because your brain is the boss of your whole body, and it needs special nutrients that the rest of your body doesn't need as much. And there's actually a name for that, and this is called neuronutrition. Most people feed their body junk or processed foods, and then they wonder why they have things like brain fog, or they feel slow, to think, or struggle with focus, or even have more serious mental health issues. The good news is eating whole foods keeps your brain sharp and strong. The solution being to eat whole foods and those which are particularly good for brain health. And these include things like green leafy vegetables like spinach or broccoli and other green veggies, avocados, which are packed with healthy fats that your brain loves, olive oil, sardines, which I have every day, and caviar, which are high in omega-3s called DHA that really do power your brain. Blueberries, I like to call them brain berries, and real dark chocolate, not the super sugary kind. We actually make our own. We make our own everything, really. And so every time you choose these whole foods instead of packaged snacks, you're giving your brain the right building blocks to think clearly, remember things, and feel good. And so there you have it. If you're ever unsure what to eat, don't overcomplicate it. Even if you just focus on good quality meat, eggs, fresh fruits and vegetables, and some fermented foods, you'll be well on your way to feeling good and looking your best. And a simple rule I love, if your grandmother wouldn't recognize it as food, then it's most likely junk. Remember, you are what you eat. If you put highly processed junk in your body and you do so often, then you're not going to look good. You're not going to feel good. But if you put whole foods into your body, you're going to feel great and you're going to function good. You are a whole person, so eat whole foods. So let me know, how often do you incorporate whole foods into your daily diet? Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to learn more about the other essential attributes of staying in your best shape. And until next time, watch what you chew, do what you need to do, and always live true.